Good morning and welcome to the Bureau webinar, Hub and Spoke and the Future of Workspace. I'm Kay Quillen, I'm the Bureau Marketing Manager. For anyone who's not familiar with Bureau, we're an independent workspace consultancy specialising in furniture procurement and office move management, and with a focus on sustainability and wellbeing at work. I'm just going to explain the format for this morning before handing over to our panel. We're going to have a 40-minute panel discussion followed by a 20-minute Q&A. You'll see at the bottom of your screens, if you're not familiar with the Zoom webinar, that there's a Q&A icon, so you can send the panel questions throughout the discussion. Also, just to mention that we'll have a couple of polls running through the webinar. We'd really appreciate your participation. There's no right or wrong answers and they're completely anonymous. Likewise, at the end of the webinar, there'll be a very short survey. Again, really appreciate your participation, and it's also anonymous. We'll be recording the webinar and I'll send that on to you by email afterwards. So if you want to share it with your colleagues, then you can do. Also, just to mention that we are using some research from a paper done by the Incident Group in Hickey, sharing some stats from that throughout the presentation. If anybody's interested in seeing that research, then please just drop a message in the comments and I'll either share in the chat or I can email it to you. Okay, that's it from me. Let's get started. I'm going to hand over to our Commercial Director, David Bell, to introduce himself and the panel. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Kay. Morning, everyone. My name is David Bell. I'm the Commercial Director for Bureau Workspace. I work supporting the sales and marketing teams in Edinburgh, Glasgow and London. Andy?
Morning, everybody. My name is Andy McBain. I head up the Future of Workspace and Design team in NatWest, and the team are responsible for leading the strategy on exactly what it says on the tin. So what is the future of that workspace? How does it impact office design, and how do we design that space to meet the brief from many different types of colleague group that we have across the bank? I'll pass the baton to April.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm April Burns, and I'm a workplace consultant for JLL. So I'm currently in a dedicated change management role, but my last 15 years of workplace has involved anything from design to strategy to working with Andy and RBS and all those kind of things. And those of you that don't know me, you're probably going to sit and try and work out my accent every time I talk. So just to let you know, I'm American, but I've been over here for 23, 24 years. So my accent is a little messed up. So apologies for that.
Good morning. My name is James Halliday. I work on the interior design team at Squire & Partners. We're an architectural practice, for those of you that don't know, based in Brixton. And there's about 10 of us on the interior design team, and obviously we spend a lot of time looking at the design for offices and co-working spaces. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, guys. So the topic of hub and spoke and the future of workspace. Flexible working is not a new term. Businesses and other organizations have been embracing different forms of flexible working cultures for a number of years now. However, many still resisted that form of working until the global pandemic arrived and forced upon massive change for businesses and organizations who were used to working in offices across the globe. And what that demonstrated was that largely businesses and people can cope not working from the office Monday to Friday. During the pandemic, although we are very much at the early stages here of starting to gather up all the data in terms of how people and businesses have in terms of how their sort of attitudes and attitudes towards working have shifted or potentially shifted, what we are starting to see is that there has been a significant increase in the number of people of all age groups starting to look at moving to rural locations. The proportion of London-based buyers, for example, registering for homes outside the city has more than doubled in the last year. And 71% of young buyers are now craving outdoor spaces more than they were previously. So what now? Now that employees have a taste for a new way of working, what impact do we see this having on the future role of the office? What opportunities lie ahead for businesses and other organizations, and what do they need to consider in order to ensure that they attract and retain the best people while maximizing productivity? The hub and spoke model isn't a new one. It's been given a stronger brand identity over the last year. It's very much been talked about across various platforms since the pandemic started. But what potential does it have for the future of the workspace? Is it the right fit for everyone? That's what this webinar with our panelists, our expert panelists are here to chat to you about this morning. So James, if we can start with yourself, as someone who specializes in workspace design, would you mind just giving us your definition of what the hub and spoke model is generally understood to be?
Of course. Well, interestingly, before I was asked to talk on this topic, I wasn't actually familiar with the term hub and spoke. So, I mean, that's not to say that we've not been implementing a lot of the kind of thinking behind hub and spoke into the work that we've been doing for a couple of years now. But my understanding is that essentially you have a centralized hub, which acts as the headquarters for a business. It doesn't house all its staff. It's more of a kind of clubhouse where staff will come on a less regular basis, and then you've got the various spokes which are located in kind of more suburban areas. And I think, you know, for me, they tend to be co-working spaces where you've got lots of different organizations who kind of share the workspace and all of the facilities that come with that. That's my understanding of the hub and spoke model.
Great. And April, how have people's attitudes to the place or the places that they recognize as being the spaces that they work from, how do you think that they've changed since the pandemic?
I think probably initially everybody was super excited that they could actually work from home. But I think for many, I'm sure the novelty has probably worn off a little bit. You know, I think sitting staring at the same four walls every day is probably starting to get to people. But interestingly, there was the Leesman study that was out recently that does the indexing on workplaces and things, and they've started up their own indexing for people working from home. And they did say that people who had a dedicated space in their home were a lot more happier and a lot more productive than those of us that were just working off of a kitchen table. So, and I think, you know, we have to bear in mind, you know, we were super excited to be working from home. Now some of us may be desperate to get back into the office. And we have to think about those 3 groups of people or 4 groups of people, you know, when they're coming back. So you've got the people probably at home that are sick to death of it and just want to get back into an office. And then you've got the people who are probably still really scared about leaving the house, you know, maybe nervous about getting public transport again for the first time, that kind of thing. And then you think about all of the new joiners that organizations have had over the pandemic. So I know an organization that I'm working with at the moment, they've had a 25% increase in their staff base in the last year. So 25% of those people have never been into an office before. So yeah, I think although I think we're in an interim state, and I think people initially will be really excited to get back, but then we're going to have to get back to kind of a normal state of that balance of working from home and being in the office.
Yeah. And Andy, I mean, is the hub and spoke model, I think I'm right in saying is not something that's new to the bank. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely something we had pre-pandemic. The interesting kind of question we've got is it still relevant today? So it'll be interesting to see where the debate goes over the next 40 odd minutes. So yeah, previously we've got 2 kind of scenarios in Edinburgh. We've got an out of town campus but we've got a lot of people who live in the city centre. So we actually had probably what most folk would call a reverse spoke model, whereas we had spoke sites both in kind of market towns around central Scotland, but we also had a very big spoke site in the middle of Edinburgh to deal with the large population that lived in Edinburgh but commuted to the out of town campus. And then if you reverse that for our London campuses, where people are coming in from north, south, east, west, to commute into London, we had various spoke sites outside of London. And we've also, obviously, we've got a branch network, and the branch network is continuing to evolve. Sometimes we have some space above our branches on the first or second floors in branches, and sometimes that can be changed to spoke sites as well. But again, the model, we're very interested in looking at that model to see what, not only can we open that up for colleagues, but can we open that up for customers, etc.
Interesting. Okay, we'll be interested to delve into some of the details around that as we go through the discussion. So interestingly, I mean, one of the stats, Kay had mentioned this earlier on, from the Instant Group in Hickey, is that 57% of employees want an office closer to home. So that kind of does lend itself towards the sort of spoke model that we're chatting about. So moving on then to a bit more detail around the design aspect of designing for a dispersed portfolio. April, I guess before we even kind of get to the stage where you're designing this type of model, what sort of steps would you advise an employer to consider when carrying out their due diligence on the prospect of even rolling out a sort of hub and spoke type model?
So for particularly when you're looking at the spoke element, and again, like what Andy was talking about, where you maybe do it above a branch, or you find kind of a different space, so many things kind of forget to be considered. So if it's not a dedicated office, you know, how are you going to get printer paper in there? You know, it's just all the things about like access to the site, how the security works, the safety, everything else. So there's actually quite a long list of things that you have to go through if you're using maybe a spoke site that's not a dedicated office space, and you're maybe trying to double up with space. I think the biggest thing that the organizations come across as well is that security aspect. So it's your Wi-Fi. And if you're maybe bunching up with other organizations, how does that shared Wi-Fi work, and confidential conversations that everybody freaks out about? So, you know, that's a big thing. But I think, you know, it's nice to see organizations that are like joining up together, that are breaking down those security walls and those, you know, scaredness of the conversations, to actually be able to kind of share spaces and make best use of that real estate.
Yeah, and I guess a big factor in all of this is very much going to be about understanding where your workforce is based, in order to then define where you're going to want to start establishing some of these spoke type outlets.
Well, absolutely. And I think it's, you know, doing that postcode analysis. But I think at the moment you've got so many people that are dispersing their own postcodes at the moment. People are trying to, you know, find houses by the beach or up north in the hills and in the Highlands. And so I think, you know, trying to find, and I think RBS and NatWest have done it really well with seeing that, you know, particularly a bit of real estate that's maybe underutilized, and seeing, right, you know, what is that population that it can support. So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword of what's available and where are people at.
Yeah. And Andy, why do you think there is even a need for designing spokes, and simply not just having people working from home when they're not at their sort of central hub?
I think, well, there's certainly been a huge amount of research about what everyone's feeling about working from home, and whether people are wanting to come back to the office, etc. I think if you look across the UK, if you have, whether it's a regional spoke site model or a local spoke site model around your HQ, and your HQ might be anywhere around the UK. So there's lots of different versions of what that hub and spoke model might look like. But I think it helps two things. One, it might reduce your commuting. So everyone has a cost to commuting. So if you're going to commute, it costs you money. It also costs you a lot of time. And I think over the last year, a lot of folk have found that they've adapted that time that they used to use for commuting for different purposes. So, and I'm guessing the vast majority of that will be a positive experience for people, and they want to keep hold of some of that. Again, it might be a cost model as well, because if you might need a smaller HQ, and a slightly larger hub model, so the economics of it. So I think there's lots of different factors playing to it for lots of different, and each organization will look at the well-being of their colleagues, the commute, attraction and retention is a massive thing for staff, and for, you know, can you now work anywhere and live anywhere in the UK and work for anybody? Or do you need to be next to the HQ building? Yeah.
And James, I guess, I mean, in order to design a hub and spoke model for businesses and the public sector to thrive, I mean, my perception, and I might be wrong here, but my perception is the spoke element could be the more challenging part. The central hub is, you know, this kind of premises where you can encourage collaboration and creativity and these sorts of things are already being designed in a lot of workspaces and have been for a number of years. But the spoke element could be something that could be a bit more challenging. Do you agree with that? And what sort of challenges do you think the commercial property sector needs to overcome?
Yeah, I think that they both have they come with their challenges. I think with the hub, from a design point of view, as you say, it's you know, it is that encapsulates that organisation, that business. It's very much tailored to the specific kind of needs and requirements of that business. Whereas with the spokes, they are if for example, it's a co-working space. The tricky thing is how does that spoke, how does it not feel secondary to the hub? How does it still represent the business? I think that it's obviously harder to customize and to kind of to make a shared space feel like it represents your organization. So I think that one of the challenges is how do we design and provide space that allow organizations to do that. I think that's quite specific to co-working spaces though. I think, you know, the other thing is that a hub, you could have, you know, you're in charge of the services that you provide there. Whereas, you know, if you are sharing a co-location workspace in a kind of out of town area, then you know, you're relying on the landlord or the building operator to kind of provide those services, whether it's catering, cleaning, those kind of things. So I think that is a challenge for the commercial property sector, and I guess also just, you know, convincing businesses and organisations that, you know, these spokes are actually worth the investment and kind of worth the you know, financially, versus the kind of working from home model, that you know, it's worth buying into that. I think, yeah, I think I agree that probably the spokes are the more challenging elements.
Yeah, great. Andy, one question I was keen to understand from yourself, with the bank being a company as big as it is, with the amount of buildings that it has across the country, what sort of challenges and opportunities do you have in terms of the management of assets? You know, things like FF&E, for example.
It's a huge challenge, definitely. And we also have a massive climate and carbon agenda. We're one of the main sponsors of COP26, and we take it very, very seriously. It's one of the kind of 3 priorities of the bank, is to support the climate agenda, especially through its lending portfolio. So we take, and obviously we've got to kind of do what we preach as well. So we've got a massive in-house, we've got a massive recycling and upcycling and reuse agenda on furniture. We've been working with manufacturers to look at how we change the use of components of furniture. So we've recently taken desktops and put them vertically, made a stand for them, and turned them into whiteboards. Okay, and we're doing that at scale. We're reupholstering a huge number of chairs now rather than buying new. So all that type of thing will help kind of the whole reuse piece. And traditionally spoke sites, when we were doing the whole kind of spoke site program back in 2016, 2017, they would always get the secondhand furniture. Okay, that's just what happened, because they kind of got the good quality secondhand stuff. Now everywhere's getting the good secondhand quality. You know, we're just recycling, reusing all the time. So we are still buying new. So if you're a furniture dealer, it's still good news. We are, and manufacturer, we're still buying new, but it's much more of a balance now. Because and it's again, it goes back to the cost model, making things pay. And I think the big thing is, whilst we know the direction of travel, what we do next is just the next evolution, and we're going to be evolving that again in 6 months, and another 12 months, and another 6 months. You know, what's happened at the moment with COVID and the pandemic has just been a massive, once in a generational kind of fast track change of hybrid working and the way we work. You know, it's absolutely boosted it by whatever, 5-10 years, whatever you want to say, depending on your organization. And I think that's where we are with a lot of the climate, the furniture reuse, the furniture agendas, and all the rest of it. I think it's been a generational change in people's approach.
Yeah. And in April, sorry, last question, we'll move on to the next section, but I was interested to ask you about data and the use of data and all of this. I mean, my perception would be that data is hugely important to this entire process. What's your sort of take on the use of data and our kind of, as we move through this sort of journey that we're on at the moment? Oh, you're on mute.
T-shirt. Yeah, so I'm a total data geek, and I love all that kind of stuff. And I think it's like, it's pulling from all the sources that you possibly can. And I think the organizations that are doing it really well and doing it smart, or are testing or checking and challenging as they go. So it's not this is it, this is the final version right now. Let's take some time to test it out. And particularly like for your occupancies and things like that, you know, it's giving them a space, monitoring how they're going to use it. Right, do we need to change it? Do we need to invite more people into that space? I think that's really important to kind of keep an eye on that. I also think it's super interesting at the moment, the organizations that are starting to really look at that well-being. So I think well-being is a really difficult thing to monitor unless we're all wearing wearables. So I think organizations that are doing kind of studies now where people can volunteer to start, you know, using their wearable data, share the wearable data, and you can kind of see what that impact is to well-being. I think that's really smart, because everybody tries to play the well-being card from a data perspective, but how many people are actually able to truly measure it? So I think there's a lot of data points you can pull from, and it doesn't have to be all about the building. You know, you can take your building data, your HR data, you know, your postcode data, all that kind of stuff, and actually use it to tell a really convincing story.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the data you're going to obtain from your own people is going to be one of the most important aspects in all of this.
Absolutely, but I think as well, people have got real survey fatigue now. So sending a survey out, like, how are you feeling? I think people are kind of over that. So I think it's also kind of engaging that data differently. So, you know, like Kay's got the polls up and things at the moment, and when I'm delivering workshops and things now, I'm finding doing those interactive polls are really useful, because we can see the stats straight away, and we can actually, you know, start those discussion points. So I think a lot of people, when they're filling in all these surveys, just the data just goes somewhere and you never get to see it again. So making it visible, people are probably more likely to interact with it.
Yeah, cool. An interesting one here is that they're estimating HQs will shrink by up to 40% in the coming year. I'm not actually sure how they managed to pull something so accurate together like that, but it'll be interesting to see how that one evolves. Moving on then to the sort of topic of well-being, and we sort of touched on it already, but company culture, I think, is a massively important aspect of any business. April, just kind of coming to you again on this, one of the biggest question marks appears to be the potential impact on company culture as we're sort of dispersing or working in a more dispersed way. How do businesses achieve the desired outcome of creating a great working culture in a hub and spoke type environment?
I really think they need to start getting creative. because sending emails out like, how are you feeling, this is not culture. Or maybe just hosting an activity for thousands of people like at a town hall, that's not really engaging for people to kind of get on. So I think they need to get creative. And you also have to think about the new generation that's coming in. We're used to be able to going on Twitter and harassing ScotRail, your trains are late, and getting a response really quickly. Those are people's expectations. So you need to kind of be open and transparent about allowing people to kind of engage with that culture and help kind of develop it. But you'll with the hub and spoke model as well, you're going to get your little subcultures, so your little spoke site, maybe in Dunfermline has a different culture than the one that's maybe, south of Glasgow, that kind of thing. But I think we should embrace that and enhance it. People are going to really crave that community aspect when they come back. I think the organizations that do it really well are the ones that use things like Facebook at work. You can create your own groups, you can interact with the groups that you want to work with, you can make information easily accessible, and people are used to that social media element at the moment. But I really do think that organizations need to kind of get a little bit more creative with it, because I just see so many companies out there that are just sending emails out, we're going to do this or we're doing that. That's not engaging. People are fed up with the email traffic that's going on in COVID. But we just need to empower people as well to kind of be adults when you come back to work and be able to be trusted and make those decisions and make people feel comfortable, with these new ways of working. And you think, again, those organizations that have taken a massive increase in headcount over the pandemic, how are they getting that culture across to these people that haven't been in an office? I would imagine that very few are doing it very well. But it'd be interesting to see some good case studies once this is all over, to see what's worked and what hasn't.
Well, speaking of case studies, I was interested to get Andy's point of view on this as well. Because Andy, I mean, how have you found that within the bank? I mean, in terms of trying to achieve a positive working culture in a sort of hub and spoke type environment?
So at the moment, we don't really have a hub and spoke model. We've got most of our large buildings are open, but we're not opening. We don't have every single building we've got open at the moment from an office point of view, because there's actually not the demand, and we need to make them safe and all the rest of it. So it's a bit of a muddled place at the moment. I think, just picking up on April's point, a lot of that kind of culture comes from people and from leaders. And I think if you've got a nice, strong, clear leadership message about culture, that absolutely helps as well. And just reinforcing that kind of helps. Helps engage people, etc. I think the other thing about on the hub and spoke piece is just the different. April was touching on it. You've got different generations at work. You've got different people in different times of their job. You've got people with different pay grades, and all of that is in the mix about whether they want to come back into the office, go to a spoke site, or continue to work from home. I think someone said at the beginning, some folk have got fantastic work from home environments. A lot of people in shared accommodation roll out of bed and that's it. That's the space they've got. They might not have a lounge, they might not have a dining room table, etc. Or if they do, they share it with 6 other people. So I think there's a lot of different recipes depending on who you are. It's definitely not a one size fits all.
Yeah. James, just moving on to yourself. I mean, what type of organization do you think is the right type of fit for a hub and spoke work environment? I mean, is everyone, would you say, applicable towards this type of working model?
That's a hard one to answer. I guess I would like to think that through good design we could make it accessible for all organizations, but I think the reality is that there are always going to be industries that don't lend themselves so much to kind of that way of working. I think, speaking as a designer and someone who works for a practice of 160 people, I think the last sort of 12-18 months have been incredibly difficult for us in the job that we do, where it's extremely collaborative, and as Andy and April both say, for the more junior members of staff and people who are just making, starting their career, the way I learned was being surrounded by, my senior members of staff, and that's how I've learned everything. So I think it's been a hugely difficult thing for people to kind of not have over the last 18 months. But that being said, I think that, we are kind of moving to a more flexible way of working. So we can't deny that that it can work. We've made it work, but I think it's massively important that we do have that time back together. And yeah, I think really those kind of spontaneous interactions that we share with kind of colleagues, they're not planned meetings in the diary, but actually they're a really important part of our day, and they're a massive part of, particularly in my world, in the design world, actually, how ideas kind of bounce around and improve. So I think it can work. It's just it's just managing it in a way that means that you don't people don't slip through the net. So I think that can happen.
Yeah. Are you seeing anything? I mean, are you seeing any shifts from clients at the moment? Sort of, new briefs coming through that you weren't necessarily seeing prior to the pandemic?
I think we haven't necessarily seen clients who are kind of pursuing the hub and spoke concept strictly, but in many ways, a lot of the work that we've been doing for some time on co-working spaces, we have a great deal of involvement with various co-working spaces in London. I think that many of the elements of the brief for those projects tie in with the hub and spoke, and particularly the spoke model. So I think it's a direction that we've been moving in for some time, and probably COVID's probably just accelerated it to a certain extent.
Yeah. So yeah, another stat from the Instant Group. So 77% of office workers say an office close to home is a must for their next job. And then, so moving on to our next sort of topic. I mean, Andy, we're clearly at the early stages of gathering data to understand the demand for commuter town locations and the appetite for potentially having spoke locations adequately set up. Is it good for business and local economies to start creating that demand, do you think?
Yeah, I think without a doubt. I think there's been some really interesting kind of papers and observations that whilst if you take London, say Bishopsgate, all the cafes and restaurants around Bishopsgate aren't there, or have had to close, or have found it really very, very tough over the last year. But to counter that, in towns, commuter towns and villages and whatever around our cities where people are commuting from into the bigger cities, whether it's Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh, Glasgow, those smaller independent coffee shops and cafes have probably done a whole lot better, because people are going out and treating themselves to a coffee from where they live, etc. So there's winners and losers, unfortunately, in this. And I know locally around me, the local coffee shops are loving it. But I know going into Edinburgh, if you go to some of the big coffee chains in the city centre, there's hardly anyone in them. And they'll be really, really struggling. So I think there's winners and losers on that. And you can look across whether it's gyms or convenience stores or whatever. They're all, again, there's winners and losers on all of that.
Yeah. April, if businesses and other organizations with less financial resources want to explore the hub and spoke model, what I mean, if any support is there to help them to plan for this from a financial and from a people perspective?
I really think there's a lot of opportunities to kind of partner up, and particularly, public and private sector working more together, that kind of thing, and being able to kind of share that knowledge. So in Scotland, we're really lucky to have an organisation called the Scottish Futures Trust. So they do a lot of support with the public sector in terms of giving them the best tools, to make the best workspaces, etc. But they've done a lot of work in terms of like partnering up organizations that maybe have a bigger site that can support a smaller site, by again getting over those kind of security barriers, and the confidentiality and all that kind of stuff. So I think smaller organizations, they don't all have the financial resources to tap into the big consultancies, that can help and look at this stuff, but there's bigger organizations that are doing it well. So I think the big guys and the little guys just need to do some partnering up.
Yeah. And James, what role do you feel flexible workspace providers, co-working providers, for example, can play in helping to supply spoke locations in commuter locations? I mean, are you seeing it at all from any of your co-working clients, for example? Are they looking at more sort of rural locations for some of these premises being set up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're actually building. So we're in Brixton. So we're whether you would call that rural, I don't think so. But it's obviously we moved into the department store, our new offices, a few years ago now. But we're in the process of actually just finishing a co-working space as an extension to this building. Which is very much kind of embedded in the Brixton community, and will be used as a kind of a local workspace for those who kind of live in this part of Southwest London. So, I think, we're obviously seeing a need for it, and we recognise that as a space, it has to compete, and it has to, challenge the highest quality offering of workspace that one can get in the centre of town. So, as well as there being desk space, you've also got a number of shared facilities, screening rooms, bookable meeting suites, private dining, restaurants, spas, those kind of things, which I think they all help to create sort of buzz around the place, and it becomes like the hub of where it is, and it's very much embedded in the community. And yeah, we are seeing clients who are looking at more out of town locations, because I think they too recognise that people would much rather sort of run 20 minutes to work or get on the bike for 10 minutes than commute into the centre of town. So yeah.
Great. So moving on then just to our final slide then, or sorry, second last slide, I should say. We touched earlier on Andy, I think you had chatted quite a bit with regards to the impact on sustainability. I think it's probably a fairly obvious thing to say that, if more and more businesses and organizations were to move to a more sort of hub and spoke type working model, or having a hub with people, combining that with working from home, that we're going to see a positive impact on sustainability. Do you think that in itself, Andy, could be quite a big driver because I know that there's a lot of businesses now are looking at these carbon targets that they're now looking to achieve. Do you think that in itself could be quite a big driver for them to seriously consider, an opportunity post-pandemic to look at this kind of newer way of working?
Yeah, definitely. So, the spoke site model definitely, I think if you model it right, you're going to definitely reduce commuting for a lot of people. We've recently opened a new branch in Bristol, which is kind of the first pilot of a whole new branch setup. It's got the traditional branch transaction areas where customers come in and do either automated or customer service-led transactions at counters. But we've also in that space got a small classroom space that we can use ourselves to promote our digital apps and our digital interfaces with banking. But we can also, we've also got a partnership with the local entrepreneurs in Bristol, and those entrepreneurs can use that space free of charge to promote their goods, their services, etc. And within that, you can also touch down. So you can use the bank's Wi-Fi free of charge, and you can touch down and co-work in that space as well. So we're trialing that. We think we've got a lot of really good data, as April says, about how that's working as kind of the economy opens up, as more and more people go to different places. So that makes that whole space much more sustainable in lots of different ways, because it's got a much more heavier footfall, therefore your investment is more sustainable, etc. It definitely reduces people commuting, because those facilities are in a central hub within a market town or a city. And your last piece is the furniture is used. The flexibility of the furniture is key in how can it do lots of different jobs. So it kind of goes back to the hub and spoke is a choice for colleagues or for your customers or whatever. And the furniture should offer that choice, that flexibility. And if your furniture is sustainable and it's going to last a long time and it's going to do more than one job, that all adds to kind of the equation of success for me.
Yeah, well, one of the we've put in the line there, furniture as a service. I mean, one of the things that within Bureau we've been exploring with organizations and clients now for the past 12 months is the potential for actually clients being able to rent furniture as opposed to actually buying it. And that, well, one, you're keeping it within the circular economy, so you're reducing that strain on manufacturing new, and also you're avoiding it going into landfill, which is a massive issue in our industry. But for an organization that wants to work in a flexible, fast-moving environment, you know, that type of offering potentially might be something that could have some legs behind it. So just to round ourselves off then, this is really a question for the panel. I mean, would you say, is there enough research and data now to prove that the sort of hub and spoke model will become a larger part of the office's future? Anyone care to step in on that one?
I think there's a lot of data out there, you know, both from a global perspective and probably a more regional perspective. You know, I find the leasing studies like super interesting, you know, with, you know, how people perceive their offices or how they see their work set up and that kind of thing. And I think people, as Andy said, people are kind of driving that culture. They're going to drive demand, you know, they're going to drive, you know, that demand to work in a different way. And I don't think you're going to see us all coming back to offices kind of 5 days a week. We know there's data to prove that's not what people want. And I think a lot of people are saying, you know, 1 to 2 days, you know, or 2 to 3 days a week is what they want. So there's a good driver for that. But there are also people, you know, craving that collaboration time and feeling back to that kind of community element. And I think the spoke model could definitely support that. I think, you know, colleagues in London, I can't imagine them wanting to do those horrendous commutes that they do, you know, 3 hours a day or even longer at some points. You know, you're going to have to have to justify to yourself why you're going into the office. Do I need to be there, and what is the value of that time?
And final question then, what key developments do you feel need to happen then for the UK to potentially thrive from a hub and spoke working model?
Probably, I'm just going to stick my toe in the water here, and April touched on it, is partnerships. Okay, because if lots of different organizations do things individually, that'll work for those individual companies, but I think the partnership model of opening spaces up and for, you know, whether it's your customer group, whether it's your client group, whatever it is, but I think the partnership model helps, and I think you get a richer engagement and a better chance of that spoke site being full and busy and having a buzz around it and being an engaging place, and therefore it has a scalability about it, and you can invest a little bit more money in it. Because I think one of the bits coming out of all the research out there is a destination needs to be very engaging. The new workplace, the new destination of when you leave your home, when you go somewhere, is going to be much more closely aligned to the retail model of, if you go shopping and that shop is engaging and you get a great customer experience, you'll spend the money there. Yeah. So it's going to be the same for the office or the hub or the spoke. It needs to be engaging. It needs to be well set up. It needs to have a fantastic experience when you go there. And if you've got that, people will come back.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess it's on us then to, I think that's, yeah, there is a responsibility definitely with, you know, the design industry to provide these bespoke workplaces that can offer all of those things that Andy just touched on, and you know, the great kind of communal facilities that give it that feeling of you know, yeah, collaborative space where multiple organizations kind of come together to be part of something that's bigger, and then, you know, whether it's curated event programs, you know, just to encourage discussion and collaboration between organizations.
Yeah. Great. Well, listen, thank you, guys. It's, you know, been brilliant to get all of your views on all of that. Really appreciate your time. And thank you to everyone for listening. Kate, I'll hand over to you. I think we might have one or two questions.
Okay, thanks. I've just launched that second poll, so really appreciate people's thoughts on, you know, following the discussion, what they think the future's looking like for Hub and Spoke. So thanks for those that are voting. Keep them coming. I'm just going to have a wee look through at some of the questions. We had a question earlier on from Joanna Knight, and she was asking us about the cost. I think we probably answered that, Joanna, but I'll just put it to the panel again, just if they want to add anything. There must be increased costs, particularly if, is this a blocker?
I don't think it's a blocker. I think potentially there is increased cost, but there's also savings. So I think the traditional, certainly from the bank's point of view, we're looking at reduced paper, reduced printing. So we've got savings, and then you've got maybe increases in that, what I just talked about, that service. The service needs to be a very, very good service when you turn up at a spoke site, and it needs to match what's out there. That, you know, it's a bit like a hotel. You'll get a 3-star, 4-star, and a 5-star, and everyone wants to go to the 5-star, but is it affordable? You know, but I think, as James was saying, it is a kind of the current debate out there is to create those really strong destinations, and therefore, what's that FM model that supports that? You know, how do you curate that space? How do you make sure it's always clean and tidy? How do you make sure no one misbehaves or follows the protocols? You know, who's going to clean the whiteboards after someone's been in a meeting room? All that sort of stuff. Yeah, there's a cost to it, but actually, if it's a really, really busy place, you know, the cost model, I don't think it's a blocker. I think you kind of just have to do it, and I don't think it's a massive increase in cost.
I think also as well, there's the potential. I mean, there was a stat thrown up there earlier on about, you know, HQs reducing in size by 40%. That remains to be seen if that will become the case. But I think what we are seeing a lot of people discussing at the moment is that the headquarters, you know, based in a city centre location with, you know, premium rents attached to them, you know, if they're downsizing those buildings by a relatively significant amount, and then taking up flexible rents in more rural locations where you see the cost of rents a lot less than you do city centres. Yeah, there will be an element of saving there, but as Andy already mentioned, you might well see a bit more cost going into the service element of things.
And I think that's a really interesting point, David, because I think, how are you justifying the value of that? It's going to be really hard to find metrics and things that will say, right, we're going to have these increased operational costs to deliver a great experience and all these created experience that maybe not necessarily, you know, exactly relate to, you know, productivity or business performance. So I think it'll be really interesting, those that are spending that money now to get people to come back, you know, what data are you using to measure it to justify those additional costs?
I mean, there was a stat. It was, again, I've looked through a lot of research this week in preparation for the webinar. But one of the things that was coming out was that one of the top 3 challenges for CEOs is attracting the best people. You know, if you're not doing these things and not investing in them, and others are, then, you know, you're going to fall behind. It's as simple as that, especially as we're seeing the numbers of people that, you know, are looking to live in more remote locations than they probably were previously.
Okay, Jill Pritchard has sent us a couple of observations. Jill, I'll just read these out if that's okay. She said, Andy's experience is really interesting. The model is going to have to be very flexible across different towns, cities, rural areas across the country. Be really good to have a joined up approach across the public and private sector, along with place-based regeneration approach. Great opportunities, and I think that's definitely come up in the conversation today about the opportunities for out of town areas. Which sort of leads me to Rod Pearson's question. Andy, you commented earlier about the coffee shops in Bishopsgate having a tough year, and Rod's asked, do those coffee shops around Bishopsgate have a future?
I think, yeah, well, there's still a lot of the builders building the big tower blocks haven't stopped building, right? Yeah. So I think people will return to the office. Okay, they might not, they're going to do it in a different pattern. Whether Mondays and Fridays become massive shoulder days and they're not busy at all, and everything is much more condensed in a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, who knows? You know, again, we don't know quite what's going to happen next, but you know, many more people are going to return to the office. Whether there's enough footfall for all the coffee shops in our city centres, I don't know. You know, no idea.
Okay. And another question from Joanna Knight. Andy mentioned having spokes at branches. Does he see this as a PR benefit? You know, where many banks are closing rural sites.
Okay, that's a bit of a dodgy question. So is it a PR benefit? I think having so the Bristol model, which we're looking to replicate all around the UK, serves our customers. Okay, it serves we've done a lot of research about what our customers need. We've got 19 million customers, mostly around the UK. Okay, so we're a big brand, we're a big bank in corporate, commercial. I think we're the biggest bank in corporate and commercial lending. We're one of the biggest banks in mortgages, in loans, whatever. We are absolutely committed to getting the UK back on its feet. So if the spoke site is the right model to engage customers and help them, etc., then that's the right way to do it.
Yeah, I think if you're creating an environment, you know, in a more rural location where you can help to support entrepreneurs, I think that's a pretty good thing.
Yeah. Well, I think the other bit with entrepreneurs, etc., is so we've got a very successful entrepreneur program, which is free. That's had to go virtual because we've got 12 entrepreneur drop-in centres all around the UK, and with the pandemic, like lots of other things, that's gone virtual. We've now through that virtualization of that program, we're hitting even more entrepreneurs than we were able to hit in a physical space. So the physical spaces are still there, but we can't bring people together to gather, to share knowledge and experience, but we've been doing it virtually on Teams and Zoom and Google Meet and all the rest of it. So the entrepreneurs are still getting a huge amount of support from ourselves. And I know other programs out there supporting entrepreneurs, but they've had to change. They've had to go virtual rather than have a physical destination.
Okay, another question from Kevin Green. With the flood of furniture that businesses are disposing of as they reduce their footprint, do the panel see an appetite for reusing each other's FF&E assets as a way of reducing the carbon footprint of change and costs?
Well, I know that we're definitely seeing that, and it's something that we're actively trying to promote at the moment. We're seeing a massive shift now in clients taking the approach of their old, if you want to call it, their old furniture, and what they can do with that, as opposed to putting it in landfill. There's a lot of work going on from businesses like ours, and clients as well as other design practices that we work with, and some of the other big consultancies that are supporting clients. So I think we've got an issue at the moment globally where I think it's in excess of 80% of furniture still goes into landfill. But I think we are starting to see a shift, and Andy's already talked about a number of the things that the bank are already doing with regards to prolonging the lifespan, keeping the furniture in the circular economy. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, I think in the spoke, particularly in the spoke workplaces, and you have lots of co-working spaces. You tend to have lots of different organisations who work in different ways, and that means that their furniture requirements are often kind of very different to one another. And actually, if you can build this kind of network of co-working spaces, which the furniture becomes a kind of a shared asset, then actually, I might. Tomorrow I might not need the 4 desks that are in my space. I might want to have a sofa there, but actually those 4 desks will they can go to another site, or they can stay on the same site. They can go to another organisation who are expanding within that co-working space and who have that requirement for those pieces of furniture. So I think there is the potential to kind of for that network to be built, and for them to for furniture to be something that's kind of to be shared and reused, rather than always needing new furniture.
Yeah, I mean, we're so Bureau is partnered up with an organisation called Breakout, and Breakout was set up to support. Initially, it was set up to support amateur rugby clubs, because the Scottish Rugby Union pooled a lot of the funding from the amateur rugby clubs, so they've got a financial challenge. So they set up co-working spaces in the clubhouses for these rugby clubs. So Bureau's we've been using the old furniture that clients no longer want, and actually upcycling that and then putting that into these spaces. And we're starting to see much more of these sorts of things coming through, which I think is a really good thing.
Okay, just one final point. Rod Pearson makes the point that, and I guess this is in reference to the co-working space at Squire and Partners in Brixton. There, James, Brixton's only 12 minutes from the West End by tube, so why would that be a more convenient place to work? Or should we really be looking at the spokes being much further out of town for people who are maybe commuting in from Brighton, or in some cases Bournemouth, or even Ipswich? Is that really what we would get most benefit from, having spokes in locations where the commute is quite long?
I guess, yeah. I mean, I think absolutely. If the demand is there, then as long as there's that demand in those locations, then absolutely, it makes a lot of sense for. I can see that someone who's travelling an hour to get into the centre of London, there's a maybe a greater need for them to have a local option, rather than someone who lives in Stockwell, who has their hub in the centre of London, but may have the choice of Brixton. But I think that that people actually, from what I've been hearing, people actually, even if it is 12 minutes on the tube, people don't really, if people can avoid that, I know personally I would. So if I can travel to somewhere more local, then absolutely I will. But I do, of course, I think providing there's the demand, then the more rural locations make a lot of sense for the spokes.
And I think certainly, James, anyone who's ever experienced London transport and some of the things that can go wrong would find that 12-minute commute quite often becomes a 40-minute commute, doesn't it? With tube strikes or delays or weather. So there's always that to consider as well. Okay, I think that's us. We've gone through all the questions. So I'm going to say thank you very much to our panel. Thank you for joining us. If anybody's got any other questions that haven't been answered, then please feel free to email us hello@yourbureau.com, and we'll make sure we get any of those out to the panel. Dave, do you want to say a final few words?
Yeah, no, just a big thank you to everyone who's taken the time to listen to the panel, and to the panel, I really appreciate your time, which I know is valuable. So thank you for giving us your views. Yeah, thanks all for joining us. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.